Hi. Thank you, everyone. It is a great honor and pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon. We are going to talk for a few minutes. I will not be too selfish, but mostly selfish, and then I get to ask most of the questions. But we'll reserve a little bit of time at the end to take your questions, and we'll give you a heads up on that. But in other words, I want to welcome our guest, Ann Beattie.
Thank you for doing this.
Anybody who was alive in the 80s?
I was.
Yes, yeah. That's when I think I first came across your stories was in the 80s. I was in college, and madam, you were taught. You were in our classes in short stories in both fiction and in novels, and Ann's work was held out as the standard of both being subtle and sly and able to get things across in stories that were more slippery than they appeared to be, and they had an odd effect. And it looked sort of easy until you tried to do it, particularly because so many of your endings were open-ended. It was hard to say what the characters were in the novel were going to do next. Her latest novel is A Wonderful Stroke of Luck, which sort of pertains to, in typical Ann Beattie humor, it's not necessarily a good thing, a wonderful stroke of luck. This refers to not getting what you want is a wonderful stroke of luck. Take that for a second. Why did you choose that? It's almost a little Rolling Stones-ish, right? You can't always get what you want, but...
Think about that one.
And then
admit to knowing it.
And then Truman Capote with Answered Prayers.
Answered Prayers, yeah,
Yes.
I know. Well, really, to tell you the truth, the main character is named Ben, and I wanted to do something that played on his name, but I couldn't come up with anything but silly puns, Ben here, that kind of thing. And that, yeah, I mean, that would not be a good reader's guide to this book, that's for sure. So at wit's end, I went out to dinner with my husband, and we started looking up everything from proverbs to any poetic lines, whatever. And somehow we segued into the Dalai Lama, who is just full of wonderful things to say always, it goes without saying. And it was the Dalai Lama that I referenced at the beginning when I took his words, saying sometimes people need to remember that not getting what you want can be a wonderful stroke of luck. And conceptually, it seemed to me that you might make more of the title when you had finished reading the book than if you were going into it, because as you were saying, you don't know how to take that tonally at first. I mean, is it good or bad? The ambiguity resides with the phrase, But I think by the time you finish the book, the characters are trying very much to invoke luck or to have good luck happen or whatever. A lot that happens in the book happens by circumstance. In other words, world events they would have no control over or something like that. So the idea of what's predestined or whatever word you would want to use for that concept, what's fate, and what is free will, is really, I hope, on display in the novel.
This one is set later than some of your earlier works, actually right in the middle. It takes place, the beginning anyway. With that, we won't get into plot spoilers, don't worry. But on shortly before September 11th, and then the 2001. And you have a privileged, preppy high school set.
Right.
That deals with that event both in live time and then later on throughout your life. And I was just curious because this is a younger set of people than you often write about. And would these be, either in your conscious thinking or subconsciously, would these be the children of some of the people that you had usually been writing about? It sounded that way to me.
When the first interview I had was, I was in Key West, Florida, and I was using the sound booth there at the studios of Key West, and I was talking to an NPR interviewer in Washington, D.C., and the first question was about, well, what are you doing talking about the millennials? And my heart didn't sink in the moment, but I had no idea, really. I don't mean to say I didn't know the names of my characters and that I didn't realize, what certain things would need to be included as far as I was concerned in this text. But it really took me aback, although she was entirely right. Lynn Neary, she was entirely right, and the book has only been looked at as a case study of millennials. I just I'm not comfortable with any novel, not just mine, being looked at as a case study. I mean, I would much rather read the wonderful journalism that's out there now. I too believe what I read in Harper's, The Atlantic, New York.
When this one started, so this was not a conscious decision?
No, it wasn't really. In fact, I went to school here. I went to public high school. I went to Woodrow Wilson.
My wife is somewhere applauding in the back.
I would be surprised if a lot of people here, maybe if it's a local audience, which it somewhat seems to be, hadn't gone to the same schools that I went to. But of course, I was there with the dinosaurs, but we don't need to get into that. I was at Woodrow Wilson before they had a swimming pool. Yeah. What I've always said, because I write more stories, short stories in number than I write novels, but I think in the back of my mind, maybe my last two or three acceptances at the New Yorker have all been from the POV of a man much older than I am. And enough of that. So I had to go to boarding school. I just had to send myself back to school. And I hang out with people of very differing ages. So it wasn't thought of as a case study. It was just, I probably know enough and I've heard enough and I've visited enough schools as a visiting writer, even if you're treated in a special way, that I can make some assumptions about what kind of school this might be. And for literary reasons, what kind of school I wanted it to be.
Was there a sharp Genesis moment? You mentioned like going out to dinner with your husband with...
Yeah, there certainly was for the title. It's a very fair question. I'm afraid I don't have an interesting answer. No, there really wasn't.
Well, I know that you have mentioned in the past that when you start, where it's going after the first paragraph, right? After you get that first paragraph done. Was that a sense in here? Did this one come that easily to you?
I hope I said that about short stories. Maybe I was just
you
having
did.
a very
In fairness, yes, you did.
egotistical moment or something like that. No, I'm terribly nervous about novels, and I always just feel that the closer I come, the farther it recedes from me in terms of my abilities. So, to me, I would still talk about things that happen, that no doubt happen out of subconscious motives, but I am distant enough from them that I only feel like a scribe. I feel like I've got some little detail or some plot element, and I'll follow that as far as I can, but please, please let something come in from the sidelines. And indeed, without spoiling the plot, something does come in from the sidelines. Early on, although conceptually, and I did a lot of revising on this book, I mean, over a couple of 2-year period, year and a half, 2 years, just not every day, but a lot of revising, tearing this book up and putting it back together again. And what was always of interest to me, even when I was blundering in a very early draft of this, was to show enough of the background that there could be indications, not keys to unlocking a mystery, but indications as to why things took the path that they did in the book. But I was very interested in the white space and the flip forward, and then we see the character Ben, whatever it is, about 15 years out of school, and things have fallen out however they've fallen out. And that I love because it was a surprise to me. I didn't know who he would have retained contact with, as we don't in those moments, what colleagues you leave that, you'll see more of or less of or whatever. I mean, a novel is no different than the jobs we have in the real world.
In real life. Do you have, I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of authors, and people have various organic ways of getting through, and some people are very structured, and some people say, I have the beginning, I certainly know where I'm going to end, and other folks, like we had mentioned to E.O. Doctorow when we were talking about, he said, writing a novel to him was like driving across the country at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can drive across the whole country that way.
Yes.
I get the sense that's how you write. Is that?
Yeah, I feel my way. Yes, I do know what that is firsthand. Yeah.
Have you ever tried with structuring stuff? Is that like an anathema? Would you break out into hives or?
I would be incapable of it. It would be so bad that I would abandon the whole project.
Wow, that would be.
And I have. That has been true. I mean, I've thrown out 250 pages. I've thrown out 400 pages. I do abandon the whole, not because of that reason, but I mean, I'm quite capable of pressing delete. That doesn't, I'm not speaking metaphorically. That's the good thing about the computer. You can get rid of it. I'm not going to pay somebody to go into my hard drive. No.
Does that, when on the occasions when you have deleted something that much, is there like a weeping or a wailing, or do you go running back like right after 5 minutes? I shouldn't come back.
I'll go with weeping and wailing.
Is there, not to dwell too much on technique, I want to talk about a number of things that you do, because you split your time between several places. You live in Maine, you live in Key West, you're often in Charlottesville. Is there a particular spot that you write in, or is it just anywhere?
I like to think that it's not just me, and I have pretty good evidence that writers are pretty restless people. But I think a lot of writers would answer also the way I do, in terms of saying that when you're in one location, the other location maybe seems more alluring. I mean, maybe not even in a pleasant way, but just that you can explore it imaginatively, whereas you don't want your imagination really to totally get the best of you if you're just going out to pick up the New York Times from the doorstep.
Right.
It's a waste of your imagination. You don't know your habits, and you're remembering something, or you're thinking of going toward that thing again. And I find that pretty liberating, as opposed to, other than as a short story, which could be written about something that truly is right outside my window and has been. I really tend to go the other direction.
Okay. Are the
Open-ended.
Are the short stories more? Do those come at a? As you mentioned, it would seem to be more quickly, but is it that inspirational that you, or instantaneous, I should say, that you sit down and like, I've got an idea and I can go. I
don't sit down to do those with an idea either. I mean, 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 or 5 times, therefore, in all the writing that I've done, I've been pretty prolific. Have I written something that I think, well, I don't want to forget this concept? Or when I was writing the first published novel I had, which came out in 1976, and was called Chilly Scenes of Winter, I did in that case, but I was so inexperienced I wouldn't do it now. I have too many superstitious beliefs, I guess. But I did write the ending, and really, when I didn't know what else to do with the book, and this was back in the days of the typewriter, so I couldn't see how many pages I'd written, on my computer, little icon going like this, keep going, Ann, keep going, Ann, I mean, what I was interested in then was just putting that paragraph aside, even if I didn't use it verbatim, and then lifting the piece of paper and putting it at the end of the manuscript and feeling like, wow, I would have forgotten that. So it's good I didn't. I like the ending quite well.
With it and it works. You mentioned that a lot of your work works on with a certain set of people, usually there's often in the Northeast. It's mentioned. I wouldn't think of you as a regional writer at all. So in some of the other interviews, people had asked you about that, and I really wouldn't associate it with that. But the words that I would say that come out a lot would be disaffected, lonely, isolation. Things don't work out well for a lot of people. In your books, nobody's really having the world's greatest day, and this isn't the world's greatest relationship. There's issues with them. Would you characterize your work that way? Would those be the words that you would choose to? Well,
this is actually making. I just remembered this when you were asking me this question, but many years ago, probably, well, it was in the mid-'80s, because I know where I was living when I got the telephone call. But I did get a telephone call, and it was somebody who wanted to talk about minimalism. Somebody from a newspaper who wanted to talk about minimalism, and I said, well, you to a person, none of us practicing the so-called minimalism think of it that way. And it started out as a term, a neutral to approving term in painting. I mean, it was appropriated from the visual arts, where it did mean something very different, and that could be talked about in a more interesting way, I think. But if you look at the writers that were grouped together, from Frederick Barthelme to to me, to Raymond Carver. These are, to me, again, such different tones, such different sensibilities, such different ways of actually making the shape of a story, because we're talking about artifice. I mean, these things don't exist, you know. So I really didn't buy into that context of, you know, the reporter's question either. And he said, so if you don't want to call it minimalism, what do you want to call it? And I mean, because I was taken aback, I actually answered with the same thing I would still go with, careful. So, you know, then careful, then what's exactly the line you walk between careful and cryptic? You see, and then we could really be here all day, you know. And I do find it interesting to talk about these things with readers, you know, with tonal changes and things that to me are very distinct, that I do understand are not necessarily, not just in my work, in the work of Raymond Carver, are not hitting the human ear at the decibel level the writer thinks, so that a writer can be very well liked or even approved of for something that is tonally very different from what the interiority is for that writer.
I was, the first novel I had that came out, I was very, very surprised after I'd written it and gone out, and I loved the cover. And all the advertising came out, and it was to be a beach book. And nobody told me I was writing a beach book. And I certainly wouldn't have written the book I had if I had known that they were going to call it a beach book, nor would have I advertised the cover. So it was very much a surprise to me.
Yep.
And there I was with my beach book, with a cover with a very moody black and green cover of a trash can. That's not a beach book cover. In case you're wondering, I liked it. It was very Edward Hopperish, and I just thought that's great. And then they said beach book, and I was like, so, yeah.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah,
Heartbreaking.
nobody asked me, and I didn't think I needed to ask, but you know. By the way, are you guys going to advertise this by any chance as a beach book? Because I have ideas about what that should be, but that's not what I'm writing, actually.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when you were growing up in high school, you had at one point, if I'm remembering correctly, had described yourself in one of the vast interviews that you had as an artsy little thing. And you grew up in Chevy Chase?
Mm-hmm. Washington.
And on the D.C. side.
On the D.C. side.
Tell us you were an only child. Tell us were you writing stories when you were 6, 7, 8?
Oh, no, I was in no way precocious, not at all. I read comic books and things that were below my age level.
Did your parents worry?
Did they work or worry?
Did they worry?
Did they worry? No, I don't think they did. I'm not quite sure why they didn't, but I don't believe that they did. I think differently now about being an only child than I thought of it at the time. I was like a lot of little children. I was lobbying for a sister or a brother so that, you know, we could take the focus off of me, I guess, or at least that was certainly part of my thought process. And then I went to kindergarten and I heard all the kids screaming and I was like, wow, this is what, you know, my parents have signed me up for. And I came home and I said, I got to tell you something. How'd your first day go? I got to tell you something. I've changed my mind. No, I don't want a sister or brother. My mother got down on her knees and she looked at me and she said, look Mama in the eye. She always calls herself Mama. She said, look Mama in the eye. It will never happen. It never happened. But, you know, I think only children are sort of always one of the adults and clearly not one of the adults. At least that was how my parents handled me. And I was very, very shy as a kid. And I was very bookish and I did things shy kids do. But it's quite a surprise to me. I mean, what even the writing life has been. I mean, the life, not just my being in my nightgown at the computer or with a pencil or something like that, but how much you do really just have to be out there.
You mentioned that, I mean, you often write about people who came up or were growing up during the 60s, and you were a child of the 60s. But you pointed out is you never dropped acid. You never did some of these 60-ish Timothy Leary things.
Well, you haven't read the right interviews.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I did not ever drop acid, no, as a matter of fact.
So the 60s, what were the 60s like for you? Was this how did that seem to be
Well,
growing up in D.C.? There was
I was at American University after I got out of Woodrow Wilson, so I was here when a lot of the early, protesting was going on. And even then, I mean, I was at the marches, but I was on the sidelines of the marches. And what was I doing? I was writing pieces that now I suppose might be called personal essays or something like that, maybe a bit more essayish than that, but about what I was observing. So that is the way I've seen myself consistently, as maybe there and present. And of course, the great example of this is Joan Didion. I mean, right. What did she miss? And yet, boy, she really is pulled back. It's what she knows by coincidence, or the sidebar to the piece, or the aerial view, or whatever. It's not because she was there pushing her way through the crowd directly. And she changed journalism in our time it just changed it in our time so much that even in those early years, she was still publishing that early. She just wasn't the big name she became. And, I think as I was reading and knowing more, she was a real role model to me about putting yourself in the center of the action and letting the action speak for itself to the extent that you could.
That's what I have two questions on that. One, she has that famous observation that about the end of the 60s being the Manson murders, right, with Sharon Tate and all that.
Yeah.
But that sentence begins, now that you mention it, a number of friends who live in Los Angeles have told me that the 60s ended right there. So she's presenting it honestly, right?
That's interesting, yeah.
But you get the idea, man, she's just right there hanging out with Charlie Manson and, the Beach Boys and all that stuff in L.A. And it's a number of friends have told me. Mm-hmm. But do you remember encountering her work for the first time? Was that like an aha moment?
I remember when it started to make a huge impact. That was probably about the time that the White Album was coming out as a book,
Yeah.
But I read individual essays as they were being published too, and there were certain voices in the back of my mind that really, for me, were just a standard of excellence in terms of things that would apply in some way, or could segue into situations and problems with my own writing. I mean, when you were asking before about that, what is that term I'm always hammered with? You had it down perfectly.
What can you
Yeah.
go back the tape? Disaffected.
Disaffected. Well, obviously it's a catch-all phrase. I can't deny it and say, what could you possibly be talking about? But for me, I mean, you wouldn't call Joan Didion disaffected. Well, actually, yeah, sure, she gets negative reviews and always got negative reviews. I mean, I'm sure there are people who would think that. But to me, I give a lot of credit to readers, and I think if you give them the right material, they will connect the dots. I grant you that the dots have to be there. It can't just be some random impression, but I think they are there. And I think if you look structurally and if you even analyze some of her wonderful essays from that period, that the lines are very blurry between fiction and journalism to me, in a very helpful way to the reader, in a very illuminating way for the reader, because she does intrude her presence, and it's a question of timing when she intrudes her presence. I mean, I can look at a story even by Raymond Carver that is extremely small, like might be printed in 3 or 4 pages in its first printing, or as it appeared in his book, an extremely short story that happens very quickly. To me, it's hyper noticeable where a different tone of voice comes in, or something alters, or we've moved forward in time, or we've moved away from something. And you have to look very clearly at what you've moved away from, and then you have to look, of course, because you're always going forward on a trajectory as a reader, you certainly are anticipating. Things have been created for you to have that anticipation. You very much have to look at what you're going toward, but you have to remember too, why did the writer, you can call it fiction, but the writer made that decision to make that move at that time. Why? Mm-hmm. I mean, I just love to go through Carver and see that. Like, here it is, right here. I'll tell you what the pivot is. I'll tell you what's going on right here in his mind.
Are you in your own work? Are you aware when that pivot happens when you're writing?
Sometimes I am, yes, very much so. But that tends to be something that, again, did come in from left field, as far as I'm aware. I mean, maybe I had a distant awareness of some scene analogous to this. But I'm not trying to transcribe something that did happen per se as it happened into my work. So I can always use it flexibly and make it a lucky accident for me to make to reinforce something in the work. I mean, because that's what a lot of it is, really. It's you in a way want, I think, I can't speak for all writers, but in a certain kind of writing, there is a way that you want the writing to be insidious enough and layered enough that the reader may even have a visceral reaction to the work, but not know exactly where to point. It's not always a queasy line where somebody says, "I'm leaving you," or, something that's very overt. It's quite the opposite. Like, why am I reading this and feeling so uncomfortable?
And that's magic, right?
Yeah, it's magic. Well, it's magic, but it's learning to be a good magician. I mean, it's looking not to make eye contact with the crowd and how you use your hands and all that other stuff. Making sure you and the duck are on good terms, and you fed the duck last night so it'll be alive when you pull it out of the hat. That kind of thing.
It's always an important to a magic
Yeah.
trick. But that's when I was talking about our professors in college would read your stuff and they'd say, how did that work? What is this? There's that sort of one hand clapping sort of sense that something's going on beneath the surface in the story, but it's very hard to put a finger on where that sense of either foreboding or loss comes from.
Yeah, I mean, that's what subtext is, for example. I realize that all writing isn't the kind of writing that would be helped by having subtext. It's not the only standard I know of, but there's a wonderful, wonderful book called The Art of Subtext by the writer Charles Baxter, who's also a tremendous literary critic. He has another book too. You know his work?
I actually interviewed him a million years ago in Detroit.
And, did you really?
He's worked at the University of Michigan and stuff. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
he's terrific.
He is absolutely terrific, and if you read his fiction, I mean, you're only helped by reading his criticism. He's not writing about his own work, but you see that he really has all the tools he needs to understand everything that the writer is actually working to keep below the surface. It's not just that it's there. The writer knows that it's there. What do you make the veneer look like that people are going to repeatedly revisit that surface? And after several revisits, perhaps would understand more about the depth of what they're looking at. It's not analogous to like to cracking open a geode or something, and you see the crystals, and you see or with the tree bark or something, the striations of levels. I'm really not talking about that. I'm really talking about writers being aware at some point in the composition process what the subtext is, and you're lost if it becomes the text. If you bring it up to the body of the story, it can only do so much for you if it poses as a fact. It can do everything for you if it stays down there, almost as though it's an unwanted dream or something like that. I mean, as with the Freudian model, the subconscious.
Well, I was going to say it's almost the monster in the horror movie. It's scarier when you don't see it.
Yes, exactly.
And it always sort of there's always that sense that it's really hard to end those types of stories, just basically horror stories, because the thing that you've been hiding so long finally comes out into the light. Mm-hmm. And once you can look at it and identify it, you can think, oh, well, it's just a thing with 7 heads and fangs this long, and I wasn't scared of that. But as long as it's in the shadows.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what you want really is always to get reader participation. And readers are smart. Readers will catch on to what's going on. I mean, I think any good reader will catch on to what's going on. Maybe not in the moment that you did as the writer, but that rarely matters. And you've had plenty of time to reorchestrate it if you want to make it more apparent to the reader. You can certainly move things. It's not like books go flying out your window and go directly into the production line, not by a long shot, more like a shooting star, and you're lucky if you ever see it again, period. But I give great credence to the craftiness of writers who work below the surface and who have things that are, I'm not talking about symbolism or anything like that, but I'm talking about noticeable moments of the story that are deliberately misleading. They might be something that you could speak of as one side of the coin, just like an attention-grabbing moment. Like, I was just reading a wonderful story a few nights ago. I had never read it before. It was by the writer Mavis Gallant, and it was in a very, very good collection called Best Short Stories from the 80s, edited by Shannon Ravenel, who had so much involvement for so many years with that great, Best American Short Stories. And it's a wonderful selection. It's really wonderful, but I hadn't read this particular story. And as I was reading, I felt, this is the great thing about reading. I just felt like a kid again. I felt like, why is this happening? This is gonna, she's totally derailing the story. Wasps come and they settle over some melon that's on a table just when you're realizing that the people at the outdoor table are family, but they don't really want to be there. And that one of them is like really more of an outsider, though you couldn't articulate it that way. You're just seeing that there's some inherent awkwardness with his particular treatment, and yet he's the one who rushes forward and bravely picks up the platter with all the wasps on it, takes the cantaloupe and puts it under a tree. At that point, if somebody had said, Ann, fill it in, I could have written easily 50 endings, and I think probably 44 of them would have been totally convincing, at least to me as the writer. You know what? Yes, it does matter, but it's because you're seeing someone you don't yet know out of context, and that is the reader's guide to how to understand totally the character that you're going to see until the whole story ends, and then you only see him hypothetically and maybe as an apparition. It's because he did that with the wasp. It's so undeniably real, but it's not Chekhov never said that about the gun on the wall, but he is constantly attributed with that saying, you can't bring a gun into a short story in a work of fiction unless it goes off. It's like, these wasps don't go off, but he is forever almost like the god of the wasp, a superhuman character that is also not up to the standard of all the other adult characters, and therein lies the kind of magic of the story, partly because you yearn for completion. You want to know, does a wasp later come sting someone, a wasp that was hiding on an underside of a plate or something that wasn't accounted for? It's not about the wasps, it's about the value judgment made by all the characters in the story that also you're being asked to make in the moment, because when the story ends, you have to rethink that character who did that. It's a miracle. It's an amazing story.
When there's always that sense, and I'm going to just ask one or two more questions, and then we'll be happy to take a couple. But I'm always amazed by that sense of when you're in the hands of somebody who really knows what they're doing. And
she does.
It's very hard to explain, but like if I'm picking my next book, this is my favorite time, I'll get like 5 or 6 books and that are in the contenders, right, from my TBR pile, and I'll pick them up and I read like the first 2 pages.
Yeah.
And the best first 2 pages wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about that in the text there that this, and then a good story is a good talking to from somebody who knows the score.
Uh-huh.
Right? This is what you're there for. And it's very hard to place what that assurance is, but there, in this example, there's something going on with the bees. There's something going on with the bees. I don't know what it is.
They never stop buzzing in your head, yeah.
I'm gonna read you, before I run out of time here, I wanted to give you guys an example of one quick thing that I just thought was beautiful. And this is from What Was Mine? And this is what from in the title story. And our setup is very short here, but there is this is with Fran and Ben, another Ben. And without giving plot spoilers away in a story that's 30-something years old, they're having an interesting relationship that is possibly adulterous. And they're having this lunch and they get to talking to the waitress, right? And Ben and Fran's hopes for this relationship may or may not be the same, correct? And they're talking, for some reason, they get into a brief conversation with the waitress about what she can identify from her customers, right? You probably see it all in a second, don't you? Fran said. You can probably look in their eyes and see what kind of tip they're going to leave. Oh, I don't know about that, the waitress said. What the relationship is to one another, Fran said. Yes, the waitress said, looking directly into Fran's eyes. I'm usually right about that.
That's from what was mine, the title story?
That was correct. And if I'm looking at that as a writer, I think the key word is directly. Mm-hmm. That's like, oh, I couldn't tell you what kind of tip you give, but lady, I know what you're doing with this guy right here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I just thought that knocked me out. Do you remember writing this, by the way?
Yes.
Did you?
I like the ending too, and I don't think it's enigmatic.
Did you like that when that went through? Did you go like, ooh?
I like writing dialogue, but my problem with it in a way is that, I'm not a playwright. I wouldn't mind being Harold Pinter, but I don't think that's a likely reincarnation, probably something much more humble. One of the dogs from my stories, maybe, if I'm lucky. But, but the problem for me is that if the story has to rely heavily on dialogue, I don't know how to keep the meaning and the nuance out of it, even without the look of a waitress directly into somebody's eye to say, I know that you know that we've got this guy's number, that kind of thing. And the visuals matter to me so much too. I mean, when exactly you decide to move away from the dialogue and say something that isn't directly related to it, but that because it's part of the same atmosphere is a kind of comment on it inherently,
Well, and it's also such a trick with dialogue. You're counting on it's another degree of not distraction, but if you have the readers are having to recount the dialogue.
Yeah.
And if you're saying this is how someone said it, right? You're counting on them getting the intonation.
Yes.
Without saying he said sternly or whatever. Here, it's just referring to the look of her eyes, right?
Right.
That's the whole thing.
Well, that's the thing, because you get the dynamic, even if you might interpret it differently. I mean, I'm sure we're all familiar with looking at, very famous actors do Shakespeare very, very differently. I mean, you're always taken aback when somebody is, giving a bit of a witty moment to Lady Macbeth or something like that. But depending on the actor's interpretation, it can be in that moment a different scene than it was, certainly. And I can't even imagine the vulnerability that anyone who wrote that would feel. Watching somebody do an interpretation that is at a huge remove from what they were hearing tonally. But you know what? The hard thing is it's got to stand up even to that. In other words, you've got to be able to play it both ways, if not more ways, line by line. I'm talking about dialogue, not exposition. Yeah. So there is no correct interpretation. The great, great, great master of this, as far as I'm concerned, Robert Stone, who is known much more for his novels than for his short stories, but I truly think his short stories are his greatest work. And he has a story called Helping that was published in the New Yorker a number of years ago, and it certainly is one of my favorite 5, maybe less than 5. He's right up there, always, who do I like better that day? It's just a personal little, proclivity. But it's such a wonderful story because he has a character named Elliot in that story, and we come to know a lot about Elliot. We find out almost right away that it's winter, that he's at loose ends, that he's a former alcoholic, that he hates his job, he's barely keeping himself together. He actually is in a job that requires him to see Vietnam vets who are overburdening his brain with their own horror tales and this kind of thing. I mean, it's one of the heaviest stories without dialogue you could ever imagine. But what I remember out of that story is toward the end when Elliot has this awful, palpably awful day. The reader really feels like on a visceral level. And he goes into the kitchen and he has a few words with his wife. It turns out his wife is a social worker, and she's been in court that day, and she knows she's lost. And what's been at stake is a young child whose parents are not adequate to take care of him. And so somewhere out in this awful cosmos too is this lost child, and perhaps even being beaten up by the parents in the moment that we're reading this or whatever it is. But the dialogue between the two of them, I swear, if you took it out and you could hang it on a coat hanger and say, what do you think of this dialogue? No two actors would read it the same way. And yet, yes, it's the general content of it that you get, but it's also that it's dialogue at all, because the whole story has been like wading through snow. Like you just can't make any progress. You can't move anywhere. So then talking would be a relief, right? No, not this talk.
It's
Just, it ends the story before the story ends. It's great.
we do have just a moment or two for questions. I am looking, and if there are, the lights are kind of bright up here, so if I'm missing you, that is my mistake.
It's really hard to see.
Do we have movement towards the microphone? While we're waiting, I know where I'd pushed this right to the buzzer. I'm going to ask one more. This is just more an observation. This is from Windy Day at the Reservoir. And this is it's just an observation that I think is just so well handled, that just, how do you get meanings into your stories while your characters are doing something, right? Fairly mundane in this case, coffee. How do you make it mean more than coffee? This is how you do it. He ground fresh coffee. As the water boiled, he thought that skills, things that you could do in the world, were likely to help you, but that objects, because they can never be complex enough and rarely beautiful enough, would almost always disappoint you.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, with that, that's just such a lovely observation that it's almost, and I think that's one thing that of your stuff that I would say it's generous in that respect. That's almost a throwaway line, right? He's just grinding coffee. We're going on to something else, but it's just this lovely little observation that tells you a great deal about the person grinding coffee.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, it's a wonderful thing when you can occupy the character's mind, and it seems like you don't have to decide between things that might be said. That is what would be said, but until you said it, it didn't pre-exist. You know, I didn't pluck that down. I didn't have notes to that effect. As going back to what we were talking about earlier, and when things just snap into place, it's probably because your subconscious really knows what you're doing by that point in a story. You know.
Yeah, that's really again
Yeah.
that sense of magic in the writing.
Right.
That you didn't know it was coming out of your head until it's emerging onto the page.
Well, that's the truth. Writers will say that all the time. I mean, maybe not publicly all the time, as though every sentence was completed for them by some alternate voice, but a lot.
We have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. So, of course, for subtext, things have to go unsaid and be left to interpretation. What is your process of finding out what to leave out?
Process of what to leave out. Well, of course, it's complicated and it varies so much work by work, but I would say that anything that I think can be done with a gesture, you know, sometimes when I'm writing a rough draft, I'm almost transcribing so that I see someone saying something, but I also see that they're making a gesture toward the room or something like that. If it resonates, fine. Just as said, I don't need to make the gesture toward the room, you know. But it's almost as though I have to do away with the visual transcription. So I strangely enough, as opposed to what I was just saying, it's as though a lot of the things you might look at on the surface of the story pretty much have to be sacrificed for the timing, the tone, and the content of the dialogue and that kind of thing. I mean, that's part of a very complicated answer. You'd almost have to look at a manuscript page by page with me, as someone else's work, not just mine.
And do you cut a good bit out if you wind up with if you start out with a 20-page story, if that's the rough draft, does it wind back to like
I have
12?
actually been so pleased, believe it or not, I know we have to wind it up, but I've been so pleased that I've just chopped a story off on page 5 and thought, well, I kind of liked it as a 10-page story, but really that was a great line to go out on, so I'm just going to do it. So maybe that really wraps it up, I don't know.
And that is wrapping it up. We have, do we have time for one more? Let's do one more question right here.
So you referred to your revision process sometimes taking a very long time.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, how much do you find the point of view, the character's voice, or other aspects of the structure changing during that revision period?
Easily answered, but it's going to sound like a very terse answer. If I have those wrong, I don't revise, I delete. I don't go to somebody else's point of view, I don't. That doesn't happen. Then I'm on the wrong track, and I'm going to have to force the whole story. Something as big as that, I probably would just start another work, believe it or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, you guys have been, all right, I'm getting
Again, on the
conflicting
theme-
messages.
On the theme
Let's-
of sub-
I think we have to wrap it up.
Okay, let's do that. I don't want to, I'm sorry, but we're getting a note that
Thank
we need
you
to wrap
very
it up.
much.
Thank you all very much.